Hey, folks, welcome to another Thursday Live. Today, I wanted to talk about this question of veganism and early human diets. So, there was a video I made that we released last week on, it was a response to someone else's vid on like veganism, vegan docs who died, vegan doctors and influencers who were dying early and so on. And the video got a lot of comments. Most of them were actually supportive, but some of them were like really spreading confusion. And people saying so just to again maybe explain my own history for people who don't know. I've been vegetarian for most of my life. I think that's still true, although I'm as I live longer, that'll no longer be true at some point. I became vegan at age 18 or thereabouts, and I was pretty militant. Everything that the vegans are saying in the comments, I have said some version of that. I've defended some version. I might even have written some version about that in zines and so on. So I'm from a generation that didn't have the internet. We had zines. We actually wrote stuff on paper and photocopied it and all kinds of stuff like that. Um, but when now we have the internet, we can fact check these things and we can see that they're just incorrect, right? So there are lots of people who want to debate other things like ethics and animal rights and so on. And I'll say that for another day. I don't believe those arguments either. But that's not the first rule. If you're a vegan and you want to come at me, the first rule is you have to actually stick to the topic. So if the video is about health and your first comment's about health, and then I say something, you have to continue to talk about health. You have to respond to what I say, or you can just choose not to respond. It's your choice. But if you pivot, if you talk about animal rights or the beef industry paying people or all kinds of crap that I don't have time or an interest in refuting, fine. You're not going to be. I'm not going to respond to you. We're not having a conversation then. You're playing what we call vegan whack-a-mole, right? So just to be clear on that point, the second point that keeps coming up is my granduncle Willie is a 110-year-old vegan and is doing really well. I honestly don't care, right? So from other data, so from the data of the longest lived, longest recorded living person that we know of, her name was Calment or something in France. I have the name wrong. Jean Calment, something like that. So if we look at that person, she smoked cigarettes until she went blind and she could no longer see enough to light the cigarette, right? She drank alcohol every day. She ate desserts every day. She was addicted to chocolate. So from that case study, we can deduce that humans can live long lives on a variety of diets. Fine. I believe you. I believe that your great uncle lived to 110 on a vegan diet. I don't care, right? What I care about is the ancestrally appropriate foods for humans, right? And so I think it's super important to use that as a default, as the default of what we're talking about. So, and I just want to sort of indicate, because I'm in the academic world and not many people are, I just want to indicate where the current debates are. Okay. So if we look at recent papers, I think this is 2024, so less than a couple years old, a year and a half old, not even. Where we are debating is someone is saying, no, our early humans were eating only meat. And these research teams are saying, no, 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 it's not just meat. There's also freshwater fish and other kinds of fish, right? So that is where the debate is right now, right? Um, this is another one that we can look at, right? This also says that certain hominins, certain human ancestors were eating entirely terrestrial animals. So again, that's mostly ruminants, elephants, things like that. The Neanderthal diet in Siberia was based on the consumption of terrestrial animal protein. In those days, we're talking about mammoths, mastodon, that kind of stuff. And the Denisovans, who are another human species, they were eating more freshwater fish. Okay, that's where the debate is. And then there's groups that were eating a combination of things, right? And then reindeer, horse, and bison, right? So that's where the debate is. When we look at the anthropological discussions going on right now, that is the spectrum of debate, right? Were humans eating mostly meat, like ruminant meat or elephant meat, or were they eating some fish as well? That's the question. And the fish is super important because when you actually look at the nitrogen isotope analysis, you find that we're eating more meat than seems to be possible. We see eating more meat than a wolf does, than a cat does, right? So that doesn't make much sense. The only way it would make much sense is if we're eating carnivores. And which carnivores would we be eating? Well, the hypothesis is that we were eating fish. That's the hypothesis that those guys are currently exploring, right? So that's what they're looking at right now. So they're trying to figure this out. That's where the debate in anthropology is right now. To what extent fish an important dietary component of early human diets? And we don't have clear answers to that. Like there's evidence in both directions. But if you're coming at me and saying that early humans were vegans or plant-based, or there are cultures that are plant-based or whatever, it's not relevant, right? When we talk about the ancestrally appropriate foods for humans, we are talking about diets that are 70 or 80% meat plus, right? Sith has said Jean Camon was in terrible condition, whereas older humans eating carnivore could still walk, think, and see at 120 years old. Unfortunately, there's no way to prove that statement. I sort of intuitively think there's probably some truth to that statement, but we have no way to know. That's just the fact, right? And why is there no way to know? Because you see, in Neolithic populations and populations of farmers, you see signs of decay. You see, for example, in populations that were eating sugar, you see that as the skulls get older, as the age of the person increases, when they died, you'll see that their teeth were in terrible shape, right? That you see in all especially the sugar eating agrarian societies, right? But if you go back to the Paleolithic hunter-gatherers, they were dying young at age 50, 60, whatever, maybe 30, 40. In those days, the lifespan may not have been that long. It may even have been 120. Like these are discussions that we can have and we can theorize about, but we don't know. What we can say is, there's very little difference between the bones that seem to be from older humans and the bones that seem to be from younger humans. So that's why it's very hard to parse some of this stuff, right? Sometimes the only way we can tell someone was old is maybe they died in some kind of natural disaster, a flood or something, and there were several generations. There was like a grandmother and a mother and a child. And that's the only way we can hypothesize that actually, no, that grandmother's bones actually look as healthy as the mother's bones. And there's no difference, right? That's what we see in those populations. So it was a little frustrating for me, if I'm perfectly honest. You can go and check out that video on vegan doctors if you haven't checked it out yet. It's a little frustrating for me because, you see, I went vegan in 1995 or thereabouts. And it was extremely frustrating for me to see that the arguments that I thought were thoroughly debunked again and again. And I've done my share of debunking, but I'm not the only one. There's many, many people who've gone out there and taken these arguments on one by one. And it's very, I don't know, it's very weird to see people just making those arguments again and again in not a very serious way. So listen, we have to, if we're eating for our health, if we're just to stick to the topic of this presentation, if we're eating for our health, if you're thriving on whatever you're doing, I'm not here to talk to you. I'm not here to talk to people who are thriving. If you have the slightest concern, if you have the slightest complaint, if your knees are achy, if you have vitiligo, if you have autoimmune, if you have whatever it is, some kind of heart condition, whatever it may be, then you should consider, in my opinion, nutritional interventions. And those nutritional interventions need to not do any harm, right? Two principles. So one is that nutrition can help. Second principle is Hippocrates' principle. That's not mine. We do no harm. And the third principle is the way we do no harm is by gravitating slowly towards an ancestrally appropriate diet. And based on all of the data, based on all of the studies, based on all the discussion going on right now in paleoanthropology, that is some form of hyper-carnivorous diet. Now, there's a problem because the animals that humans evolved to eat, according to this theory, they're no longer in existence. We cannot go and hunt a mastodon. It's not an option. I mean, I can't even hunt an elephant here. It's not allowed. It shouldn't be allowed, right? For other reasons. So we have other ways to get food that can mimic the meat to fat ratio, that can mimic the nutrients in those foods, right? And in my opinion, finding ruminant meat with a little bit of extra fat in the form of usually butter or ghee, that's going to be your basis. And then if you do that for a little while and you will see improvements, but maybe you don't see 100% improvements. Maybe everything doesn't resolve. So if you do that for a little while and everything doesn't resolve, then we need to add in things. We need to make adjustments. Maybe there's a role for medication. Maybe there's a role for supplements. Maybe there's a role for these other things. But first, we need to actually slowly transition people to an evolutionary appropriate diet as a first step, right? And I don't think this is, I think we're now entering a period in human history with AI and with so much information sort of at our fingertips and so much access to information. We're now entering a period of human history where there's no excuse for not doing that, right? I want to say there's no excuse for being sick in 2025. I want to say that in a very gentle way. Like if you're sick, I don't mean to judge you. And again, like some of these things are a responsibility, but not our fault. But there are things we can do, starting with the diet, starting with getting towards an evolutionary appropriate diet. Is it going to fix everything? Not really. But or not immediately, or maybe not 100%. But geez, it goes a long way. Sith is still talking in here. He says vegans are a joke. He or she says vegans are a joke. And also, it can take years to depollute the body and detox accumulated toxins in the body. That is 100% true. And that is something that I've seen in my own life, right? So I'll just talk about my experience with oxalate dumping. So, I mean, I was a vegan for a long time. I was vegetarian for a long time too. And what I used to find was that I would wake up in the morning with sort of furry teeth, like a lot of weird buildup on my teeth. And in the beginning, I didn't really know what that was. But then I spoke with some people who said, no, actually, that's a sign that you might be dumping oxalates. And it happened for a long, long, long time. Like, when did I start this way of, I think I started doing low carb, high fat 2017, 2018, somewhere in there. And then I first did carnivore back in 2020. So we're talking like between 5 and 7 years. And only now, like only in the past couple of months, do I wake up with my teeth feeling completely clean. And I don't even, I can brush them, but I do brush. I recommend you brush, but I don't feel the need to brush as soon as I wake up the way that I did some years ago. I don't have, some of the symptoms that you guys all know about. I don't have smelly breath. I don't have pain in the knees. My eyesight came back, all these things, right? So listen, my case is just one case. We don't base our recommendations on anecdotes. We base our recommendations on proper human food, on the evolutionarily appropriate diet for the human species. And that may be a range of diets, but all of those diets are in the hypercarnivorous range, meaning 70% or more of the food has to come from meat. So thanks so much. Thanks, Mystical Stab Artist, also for saying hi. Thanks again, Sith. Sith says he's drinking salt water called hypotonic with natural sea salt, and the detox through diarrhea is heavy sometimes. I hear you. Some of this stuff, like if it's working for you, no issues. If it's not working for you, you got to give me a call, man. Some of this stuff is like people are trying protocols that may or may not be evidence based, and maybe a bit unnecessary. Like we don't necessarily have to deal with diarrhea. But cool, man. Talk to everyone soon. Have a lovely rest of your Thursday or Friday, whenever you're seeing this.